Hi guys, Nick here from Intuitive Tennis. So what's better, a one-handed backhand or a two-handed backhand? Which one has more potential for topspin? Which one has more potential for power? Check out today's video and find out. The one-handed backhand has unfortunately been on a steady decline on the professional tours. I counted the number of one-handed backhands on the WTA and ATP top 100 rankings, and the numbers were very surprising. So on the WTA rankings in the top 100, there are only 2 players using a one-handed backhand. On the men, there were 17. 10 years ago, on the women's, there was only 2 using a one-handed backhand. On the men, there was almost double as many, 31. 20 years ago, very surprising, on the women top 100, there were 26 women using a one-handed backhand. On the men's side, it was 36. I want to add a little note to the number 26 20 years ago on the WTA Tour. If I remember correctly, many of the women players back in those days had a slice one-handed backhand. One of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest next to Serena, Steffi Graf, hardly would drive her backhand. She would hit slice majority of her times. Other players like Jana Novotná or Pam Shriver also did not possess a drive backhand. In matches anyway. I'm sure they could hit it in practice, but they would, in matches, often stick with the slice backhand. So that's something that is very difficult to do nowadays on the women's tour. Roberta Vinci is the last player to have this style of only slicing the backhand. She unfortunately retired this year at the tournament in Rome. So now it's a pure power game on the women's tour, dominated by the power two-handed backhand. So why is this happening to this beautiful one-hander? Why is it going away? Because we all love it so much. It looks beautiful when Federer hits it, or Wawrinka, or Dominic Thiem, Richard Gasquet, or Carlos Suarez Navarro, when they hit the one-hander. It's just a beauty to look at. But I think the main reason is these professional players, of course, start playing at a very young age. And yes, absolutely, it is easier to start playing tennis with two hands. Because many kids, when they try to hit a one-hander, they're simply not strong enough to have stability at contact. So when they try to make contact with one hand, the racket basically kind of collapses underneath the arm and they're unable to hit the ball properly. Where with two hands, this is not a problem at all. They have two hands on the racket and they can generate power pretty early on. However, there are always some kids that are strong enough to hit a one-hander, and we have to encourage them to continue hitting one-handers. Other players might start with two hands, and then if they feel stronger with one arm, they can switch to a one-hander later on in their junior development. How about adults, recreational players that started playing tennis at a later age? Well, this might surprise you. I actually think it's much easier for adults who started later to have a one-handed backhand, because it's much easier for them to have stability at contact. They're stronger, of course, and the one-handed backhand can be hit with very little rotation. And that's often easier for adults. In my experience, I've found that adults have a hard time with the rotation of the two-handed backhand, whether it might be a lack of flexibility, whether there might be some limitations on how much they can turn with their upper body, whether it's the timing. It's definitely a more complex shot to execute at the adult level, and it's definitely easier for them to hit a one-handed backhand. What are the technical differences between a one-handed backhand and a two-handed backhand? Well, as far as power, while it's easier to generate power as a kid, let's compare professional players that have one-handed backhands or two-handed backhands. I really don't think there's much difference in power. Somebody like a Wawrinka, who has a rotation on his backhand, can hit the ball as hard as any two-hander. And the same goes for Federer. He doesn't rotate as much, but he can hit the ball extremely fast. So I do not think there's a difference in power at the high level. However, there's of course a difference in power when kids start playing tennis, and they can generate power easier with two hands. How about topspin? What's easier for topspin? Well, I think actually the one-handed backhand is much easier for topspin, because we have the freedom of the one hand going in a vertical fashion on the finish. So remember, topspin is created by the racket tip going to the outside before it goes back. So with the one-handed backhand, we have the freedom of the one hand to do that, and we can generate a lot more topspin. When it comes to the two-handed backhand, it is a little bit more difficult, because when we try to go up, the hands are kind of fighting each other. So it is possible to do. However, you see most professional players have this kind of when the tip goes up and across this way, and that is more of a flat backhand. So I'm going to try to do it with topspin, and yeah, there's definitely, the hands are in the way. My finish gets kind of cut short, and I can't really generate enough power this way. Another possible advantage of having a one-handed backhand is a easier transition for one-handed shots. So somebody who's very used to playing with one hand might transition easier into a slice backhand or a backhand volley because they're used to having only one hand at the racket of contact. So the two-handers, they have to develop early on proper mechanics on the one-handed backhand volley and on the one-handed backhand slice to develop a little bit more stability in the forearm. Thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment in the section below. I'll make sure to answer. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.